everyone. Welcome back to another video. That's weird. I don't think I heard that echo before.
What happened?
It sounds like there's an echo in here. Do you hear it on your side?
I don't.
Okay. Well, I see Holly and Heather are here with us in the chat. Hey guys, if you guys also hear an echo, let me know. Okay, so Heather says no. That's just me then. Oh, you know
I
what?
wonder if it's my computer going through. So if I mute myself, then you can't hear it, maybe?
No. It's on my side, and I know what it is. I forgot I have my Bluetooth speaker connected to my computer, so I'm just going to disconnect that. So yeah, that's what was throwing me off for a moment because I was like, why do I hear myself? Okay, so welcome back, everyone. If you're here joining us live, say hi in the chat box. I see Heather and Holly have joined us. So hi, guys. Anyone else here joining us live, feel free to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat box. If you're new here, I'm Vanessa. I'm a YA fantasy, paranormal, and horror writer and book publisher. And on my channel, I talk about books, writing, and all things related to storytelling. So today's live stream is part of my monthly writing diversity series. It's a series I created to help writers learn how to write diverse characters. So in today's live stream, I am here chatting with the author of the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, which was one of my favorite books of 2021, Sonora Reyes. So, and today we're going to be chatting about intersectional identities, particularly Mexican, Indigenous, queer, neurodivergent, disability, and mental illness. So I'm super excited for this talk, and I'm so glad I got to meet you, Sonora, last month and ask you to do this interview. So, and Teresa is here, I see. Hi, Teresa. So Sonora, do you want to say hi and give like a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sonora Reyes. I wrote The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. It came out last year, 2022. I do have another book coming out in May of 2023 this year, called the Luis Ortega Survival Club. It is a bisexual Me Too revenge book. So it's a little different from the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, but it's got some similarities, but for the most part, it's a super different vibe. Yeah.
Awesome. I definitely cannot wait for that one. I'm definitely going to be on my pre-order list.
Thank you.
So, and Teresa's is such a good one. Yes, it was. And we have a, the Diversity is Lit book club did a live stream discussion of Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. So if anyone's interested in that, I'll link it below after this. I'm here for the Luis Ortega book too. Yes. Yeah. So, before we get started, one quick disclaimer. If you guys have seen my live streams before, you know I always start with this, but I want to remind everyone that no group is ever a monolith. So Sonora here is graciously sharing with us her experience as someone who is part of multiple marginalized identity groups. And hopefully this will help other writers out there as well, but keep in mind that her experiences do not represent everyone who belongs to those groups. So as always, make sure you do your research and get sensitivity readers for your stories. So with that said, we can dive in. So my first question that I have on here, let me pull it up, is just can you share a bit about your Mexican Indigenous culture and just what makes it special to you?
Yeah, so this is something that I have recently delved a little bit deeper into. I always knew that I was Indigenous, but I didn't know, like we didn't talk about it so much in my family. Like I'm mixed. So we have like Indigenous family and we have like mixed family. So it it was never something that I felt that I could really explore up until a few years ago, when I finally started doing the work and getting a lot more into like ancestral like history and all of that. So it's something that is I feel a lot more connected to now than I did growing up. And I would like to keep that alive in my family. Yeah, so it's not something that, with especially I can't speak to everyone's experience, but I know like with a lot of mixed people, it can be hard to relate to your like cultural identity, knowing like that you might not have like, especially because like, most of my grandparents passed away already, so I don't have that like lineage to like go and ask questions and all of that. So it's something that I have to kind of actively do myself. And I know that that's kind of a common experience. So that is kind of a little difficult. And I did want to explore that in my book because Yami also struggles with that because her father was deported. And so she doesn't have that like strong connection to her Indigenous identity, that she might be able to have if he were with her. So I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit.
Cool. So with that, I was gonna ask, since you are sort of learning more about it now and kind of exploring that side, is there anything that you've learned during this time that like sticks out for you? Anything that you were like, oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool. That's really interesting. Or, you know, something you've embraced from that.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot into more Indigenous spirituality recently, like in the last few years. So I know that like with a lot of Mexicans specifically, there's like Catholicism is like a huge thing. Like almost everyone is Catholic, but so that's like a big influence. So I'm kind of exploring like the roots of like how Catholicism and Indigenous spirituality have kind of like intermixed in Mexico, and how that affects how many of us practice our spirituality today. So it's really interesting. I don't want to talk too much about it because I could go on a tangent, but um, so spirituality is one way that I've really gotten into because for the longest time I considered myself like agnostic and I didn't feel that I was a spiritual person, um, after leaving the Catholic Church. And now I'm sort of finding my way back to spirituality through like my Indigenous identity. So it's been really nice.
That's cool. I always like hearing people's journeys or experience with discovering spirituality outside the mainstream ones that we know. So that's cool.
Mhm. Yeah.
Heather says that's fascinating. My next question was, do you have any family members that still live in Mexico or was raised in Mexico? And if so, can you share in what ways your experiences are different and or the same as your family members?
Yeah, so most of my extended family lives in Mexico still. Um my so I have like immediate family and like my cousins and stuff that live here. And then my sister's actually moving back to Mexico like very soon. So we're kind of going back and forth, I guess, as a family like throughout the years. Um but I know our experiences are very, very different. I know, for example, um, growing up, I used to go back and forth from here in Mexico a lot because my mom had like a summer job over there. And so I would spend the summers over there and the rest of the year over here. And so I did kind of grow up kind of like in both. So the experiences are so, so different, and I know that a lot of people will have kind of the opposite experience of what I had because a lot of people have in Mexico, maybe they were, like, really well off and they're really, like, doing really well, and then they come here and they're super poor because just, like, the economies are different, or the cost of immigrating, and for us, though, it was because we actually lived here and we went back for her job. We were staying with my tia, so it was like 9 people in a little two-bedroom apartment. So it was like kind of opposite because when we come back here and we're like in our more comfortable like house that fits a reasonable amount of people in a reasonable amount of rooms. And then back there it was, but it felt so like some of my best memories are from there. And I know that's not really answering your question because you're asking about family, but um yeah, so most of my family was there. So when we would visit there, it was like we would see all of the family, and the culture is very different over there. You know, I do miss it a lot. Like the food is great. Like just I haven't had this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I haven't had a good like even though I live in a border state, um, I have not had a good, like, churro since I've been there because they have them so good over there, and I haven't had, like, one that has fully satisfied me since being in the States. So,
Oh,
that's, like, the biggest difference for me is the churros.
does does your family make them like homemade or do they
No,
get
my
them from
family
somewhere?
doesn't, but, my mom knows how to make them, but she just never has for me. I should ask her to. Um, but no, she makes, like, other things, like, she makes, like, arroz con leche really good, and, like, her, flautas are really good. She, like, makes really good Mexican food, but just not churros for some reason. I guess they're kind of hard to make. They're, like, time consuming.
Yeah. Also, one that I learned that can be time consuming as well. I have a friend who taught me how to make enchiladas, and
Mhm.
I was
Oh, my
actually
mom
thinking of
makes
making
those.
some next week. So,
Yeah,
um,
nice.
it's time consuming, but so good.
Yeah, my mom loves making those. I'm not a huge enchilada fan. I'm like a bad Mexican or whatever because I don't like spicy things. But my mom makes them and they're pretty good. So,
My yeah, it's funny because my friend so she's Mexican too, but she never really did spices before. Um
mhm.
and then when she was dating my brother, he's the one who got her into eating spicy things. So we love spices.
Nice.
And now she eats way more spicier stuff than I do. I'm like, dang.
That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Oh, hey, that's my sister.
hey, hi, Gabriella. Thank you for joining us. Holly says, I'd love to try a churro there too. Are the horchatas here tasty?
I have had horchata here that I found yummy.
Tasty for the US versions.
Yes. So I think the thing that I just mostly miss is the churros because there they'll be like filled with like your choice of filling, like chocolate or like strawberry or dulce de leche or whatever. And it's really good with the filling because it's like really, oh, it's just so good. There used to be like a park by my tia's house that we stayed in, and we would go, and there was like a little churro stand where we would get like churros like all the time. It was so good. Sorry, I'm like hijacking the conversation about churros because like I'm just thinking about them now. But yeah.
Well, you got me thinking about food now too.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's fine. Well, I mean, this kind of leads into the next question, which is just, are there any Mexican traditions that you love to celebrate? And if so, what are they?
I feel like I've had a hard time separating really what is like a Mexican tradition with what is like American, since I'm like Mexican American and a lot of the stuff we do is kind of integrated. So like we have like all our celebrations, like for like example, like my mom's side of the family celebrates Christmas on Christmas Eve, which is like Nochebuena. So that's like a like kind of more of a Mexican celebration. But I never really knew that growing up. I just thought it was like Christmas, right? Um, and so a lot of the stuff that we celebrate, like it does feel very Mexican because like we're all Mexican doing it. But I guess I wouldn't really like know like so much what the difference is of like, you know, pinpointing what exactly is about it is like so Mexican, other than like the food that we eat and the people that are there and the songs that we sing, the music we listen to, and all of that. So I will say though, something I've been wanting to get more into that we did celebrate when my grandpa passed away, because he passed away, his funeral was on Dia de Muertos. And it was really nice to be able to celebrate that on his funeral. Like we had all his favorite foods and his favorite music that we listened to. Um, and so I would like to kind of bring that back. We haven't been celebrating it really, but um, I love Dia de los Muertos, and I think that that is one that I would really like to get more involved in. I've been trying to make like a little ofrenda and stuff so that we can like celebrate this year. But yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
Um, I see Gabriela says, me and Sonny Nepaleo are so excited to be here. Can't wait for Sonny's next book.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you, Gabby.
Yeah. Hi, long time no see. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for joining us here today. And Fiction to Fiction. Hi, Nia. Thanks for joining us. So let's see. The next question I have was one that I added on here, so I forgot to include it on the screen. But in your bio, you use the term Latinx, and I've heard from some people in that community that they don't really like the term Latinx. I think because it doesn't really seem to work or flow with the Spanish language and how you would pronounce it. Like there's no way to pronounce it in Spanish, is what I've heard some people say. And so they prefer the term Latine with the E at the end when speaking about non-binary people. So I just wanted to ask, like, what are your thoughts about all of it, about the term Latinx, and do you think there should be some sort of consensus within the community whether to use that or Latine, or should people just whatever they're comfortable with?
Yeah, I'm personally fine with both terms. I think Latine works if you're speaking Spanish because, you know, like it flows with the Spanish language. Latinx is like if I'm speaking English, I use Latinx because it's an English word. It's not, it's like, you know, for example, like I'm not gonna call like what's another like ethnicity, like let me think. Like you don't use the language of the ethnicity that you're describing when you say what the ethnicity is, right?
Right.
So it doesn't have to flow with Spanish because we're talking in English, right? So Latinx is an English word.
Yeah.
So when I'm describing a non-binary person who is like Mexican or like Ecuadorian or whatever, I can call them Latinx, or I could call them Latine. That's fine too. I think if I'm speaking Spanish, I would definitely say Latine, and with the E instead of the X because it flows better in Spanish because that's a Spanish word and that was created in with Spanish speakers. The people who created the word Latinx were also like Hispanic people. It was queer Hispanic people that created the term Latinx. So it was not white people who created that term. A lot of people like to say it was white people who created that term. It's not true. So I kind of get defensive over that word just because most of the people who say not to use it are like cis people. So to me, it almost feels like there's a lot of people who are not Spanish speakers who will listen to Spanish speakers about what terms to use, right? So like if a cis Spanish speaker is telling everyone, don't use Latinx, it's an abomination of the Spanish language, la 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 la, then they're going to feel like they have to listen to that because this is a Spanish speaker telling them and they don't speak Spanish. So they're like, okay, well, sure, I'll do that. But that person is cis. That's like a cis English speaker being like, don't use the singular they, it's an abomination of the English language. When like non-binary people have been using it for ages and it's, you know, yeah, it's not proper grammar until it is. And then it eventually gets added into the dictionary and it's fine. So that's my opinion on it. I think Latine, I like actually better than Latinx just for Spanish speaking. I think when you're talking in English, there's nothing wrong with using an English word to describe a group of people. Like, it's like if I'm talking about French people, I'm not going to use the French word for French. I'm going to say French. That's an English word. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's how I feel about it. Of course, I don't knock anyone who, if you don't like the word Latinx and you're not using the word Latine, you have no excuse. Like Latine is the alternative and use it if you're not going to use Latinx. But yeah, but I think most people who are talking down on Latinx is they're not using Latine either. A lot of them are just like gender neutral language is an abomination for the Spanish language. It's a gendered language. And it's like historically, yes, but like first of all, it's also a colonizer language. Why are we fighting so hard to like keep that the way that it originally was? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I have feelings about this debate. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up and pointed that out because I didn't even think about it in that way, in those terms, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're right, because I would be someone who's like, you know, we should listen to those in that community and what they say they like or don't like. But I hadn't even thought about the point that you brought up, that those that are telling others not to use Latinx are cisgender who maybe don't even use Latine. So um, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I didn't even think about that either.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Heather
exactly. Like
exists in
saying that in
Latin
the
America.
yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Um, so my next question, so this is kind of switching gears a little bit, and moving on to talking about more of your queer identity, because you've been very vocal about your queer identity, and just wanted to ask if you could share some of your experiences around that, and kind of just personally curious how similar or different they are from like Yamilets or Caesars, or the characters that you write about.
Yeah. So growing up, like when I went to high school, my experience was very similar to Yami's. Um, Yamilet is the main character of my book. She is a lesbian. The Lesbianas Guide to Catholic School. She's a lesbian. Um, I identified as a lesbian at that point in my life. I don't anymore. Now I'm like non-binary, and I'm questioning it all the time. I still don't really know like what I identify as, but I'm queer. And but at that time I identified as a lesbian. I was like attracted to women, and I identified as a girl. And so I think I had a lot of similar experiences to Yami. And then I also had a lot of similar experiences to Sesad, like more later in life. Like I I guess I identify as like bisexual a lot. It's just like an easy word to use to describe myself. Sesad is bisexual, and so like and me being somewhere in the middle of Yami and Sesad, like I feel like they both kind of encompass who I am in different ways, and in different times in my life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Um, I I really loved seeing Cesar in the book, because I don't think I've read too many books, maybe one or two others that had a bisexual character. Um, there's not too many books with them.
Mhm.
So I was excited about that. I was like, hey,
Yeah.
um, Andre in the house?
Hi, Andre. It's my brother-in-law.
Great. Um, yeah. So let me see, where did I leave? Okay, so I know you use they them pronouns, and I noticed when I was looking at your website that you you have a short story that's going to be included in an anthology that comes out in May of this year.
Mhm.
Congrats, by the way. Um,
Thank you.
and the anthology is about trans and gender nonconforming identities. So my question was going to be, do you identify as trans and or non-binary, which you did say non-binary earlier? And can you just share about that experience?
Yeah, so I identify as trans, and non-binary. I think for me, I fit both. Um, I Yeah, I don't really know what to share about it. I feel like I um have gone through a journey with like gender in the last 10 years. Gosh. Um Yeah, because I was like 19 when I first started questioning. I'm 29 now. So yeah, it's been about 10 years that I've been like kind of going on this gender journey and like figuring out like who I am, how I identify, and now like I'm pretty solidly like, yeah, I'm non-binary, I'm trans, like I don't identify as a woman. Um, so yeah, I feel pretty like firm in that nowadays.
When when you say you're non-binary and trans, can you maybe share for some of us who don't really fully grasp that or understand that, like how, because trans is identifying with the gender opposite of what you're born as, right? And so some people will say, how can you be both trans and non-binary? Can you share?
Yeah, so it's actually the definition of trans is identifying as it's not identifying with the gender that you're assigned at birth.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily the opposite gender, it's just not identifying with the gender you're assigned.
Okay.
So if you are assigned female at birth and you don't identify as a woman, you could consider yourself trans. But it's also kind of a personal thing. It's like almost like the pansexual versus bisexual um labels. It's like you can pick one or the other, and like a lot of it comes down to personal choice. You can, so like it's like with trans and non-binary, like a lot of non-binary people do identify as trans also, and then a lot of non-binary people don't identify as trans. So it's kind of a personal choice, like if you feel like you fit the trans experience, which I feel like I do, because I don't identify as a woman, and I have like a lot of, like I've gotten top surgery, like I've gone through like stuff to like change my body and like all that. Not that you have to do that in order to be trans, you definitely don't, but I feel like I've in my like I think even from the beginning I knew I was trans. Like I felt like I identified as trans ever since I started questioning gender. But I know there are some non-binary people who don't identify as trans. It just depends on your personal definition, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so that's really good to know, because I always thought it was like the opposite of what, but I like that you broke it down. It's just not identifying with what you were born with as.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. The next one was how how did you figure out or discover you were trans and or gender non-conforming?
The internet. I never had the words to describe it. Like ever since I was really little, like I always felt like uncomfortable in my body. I always felt like something wasn't right. I didn't like my boobs. I didn't like wearing dresses. I didn't like, being feminine. I didn't like any of that stuff. But I just thought I was like, oh, I'm a tomboy, right? So I didn't have the words to describe it until I was about 19 years old, and I joined like a Facebook group for it was like an intersectional feminist Facebook group, and I started learning all about like intersectionality, and like there were a lot of trans people in there and a lot of people who like were non-conforming, and they would talk about that in there, and I'd be like, huh, this feels familiar, like this feels like I've been there, and I just never had the words to describe it. So like people are describing their experiences, and I'm like, I think maybe there's something there, like I don't know. So it was other people, like seeing other people identify that way, that I kind of like figured it out. um yeah, so I figured it out like from the internet, honestly.
Cool. That makes me think when you were talking about that in your experience, have you read Genderqueer by Maya?
I have not. It's on my list though.
Okay. Well, the Equality Arizona Banned Book Club, that was our November book of the month last year. So we read Genderqueer. And so when I read that and like kind of seeing Maya's experience of, figuring out her trans non-binary identity as well, and like not feeling comfortable with certain parts of ease. Her ease pronouns are I believe. So, Maya talked about like not liking certain body parts and stuff, just like you did. And so that's what made me think of it. And I was wondering if you had read it yet.
It's on my list. I want to read it. I just haven't had the time yet.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. The next question I had was, what was your coming out experience like? And did you have support, or did you lose any relationships along the way?
So I came out when I came out as like liking girls. I came out at church camp, and that did not go over well. Yeah, so that one was very awkward. It was met with not a lot of support. And then when I came out, the first time I came out as non-binary, was also at a camp, but it wasn't church camp. It was like a I guess like a diversity leadership camp. And they were doing this thing where like you stand in a circle, and it's like you step to the center of the circle if you identify as whatever thing. So it's like to see like who all shares certain identities. And then they said step to the center of the circle if you identify as trans. And it was the first time that like I had the opportunity to like tell people. And I was like, yeah. And I like stepped to the center of the circle. There was like a bunch of people that I knew there who just didn't know yet. So yeah, that was the first time, and I didn't even have to say anything. It was just like said for me because of the circle. And that time it was met with a lot of support. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Generally, have your family been pretty supportive, or?
Yeah, they're getting there. Like they're learning. I feel like most of my family are pretty supportive, like my immediate family. Like I know they're trying. And I know that, like my mom makes considerable efforts, and then my dad has come so far from like when we were younger. Like he would have never accepted it 10-20 years ago, but now like he's getting there. So I know he's got some work to do, but he's learning, and I think he's trying. So I do appreciate them and their efforts, and I do think that they're actually really trying. So yeah. So I have had a lot of support.
Yeah, Heather says she's glad you had a lot of support, and yeah, me too. Let's see. So on the form that you filled out for this interview, you mentioned mental illness. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your mental health, that journey, and just how that part of it has affected your life.
Okay. So I try to be pretty open about this. So if you like follow me on Twitter or anything, you probably have seen me talk about it, but I have schizoaffective disorder, which is schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. For me, it's schizophrenia plus a mood disorder. For me, the mood disorder is bipolar. So I have both of those. Um, and it goes along with like, depression and mania and like the psychosis and everything like that. So like when I first came into it, it was really, really hard. I'm being treated pretty well right now, so I'm taking medication and I'm not like having many problems. I still have manic episodes sometimes, but it's not nearly as bad as it has been in the past. So that has been something that like really, really affects me and my family because it does run in my family. So it's something that's affected a few people in my family. And um yeah, it's something I try to be pretty open about because of that, because it's just something that a lot of people think that it gets so stigmatized, people don't talk about it and they think that they're the only one until they find out that somebody like, had they hit their rock bottom and they had like an episode or something, but I would rather people find out before then. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this isn't a question that was on here, but I was just thinking about it as you were sharing that. Because mental health is becoming less stigmatized, but still pretty stigmatized, especially certain mental health issues. Um, can you like share a little bit about what uh, misconceptions that are common for people who have schizoaffective disorder? What are the misconceptions and like how is it really like?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't know what schizoaffective disorder is. Like people
Yeah.
know what schizophrenia is and they know what bipolar is and they know what depression is, but a lot of people don't know like that those can go together in one thing. So I guess like the misconceptions people have about schizophrenia is that like we're all violent or like we're, just like always talking to ourselves or um you know, always like accusatory or dangerous, which is not true. People with schizophrenia are way more likely to be the victims of violent crimes than the perpetrators. Um, and with bipolar, it's like, there's like everyone's like, oh, like you're having mood swings, you're so bipolar, or like, just like anytime you have any major emotion, it's like, oh, that's so bipolar of you. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think those are two very stigmatized mental illnesses because people are like, oh, well, that you're the crazy one.
Yeah.
Like I feel like with like depression and anxiety, it's like has become enough, like it's become, I don't want to say mainstream, but like accepted enough to where like you can talk about it and people won't think like, oh my God, you're crazy. Like back away slowly.
Mhm.
But like I feel like sometimes I'll tell someone that I'm schizophrenic or schizoaffective. Usually like if they don't know what schizoaffective is, I'll just say schizophrenic and bipolar. Or I'll just say schizophrenic because that's the one that like I feel like at least it used to be the one that like was a lot more heavy in my life, but now I'm having a lot more manic episodes. So it's like they're both really heavy in my life now, but people kind of will react if I tell them that I'm schizophrenic or bipolar. Like people will be like, "Oh, like," and I have even had someone say like, "I don't think you're bipolar. Like my abusive mom was bipolar, and like and you're nothing like her." And I'm like,
Mhm.
like I just okay, like there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of like stigma. Like people think that it's like, oh, like were abusers or like all of that. So I try to be really open about it for that reason, to like help kind of decrease stigma, because it really bothers me.
Yeah. I'm glad that you do that to raise awareness. And it's interesting that comment that you had, that, you know, the person that said, my mom's bipolar, so you don't see her. Because
Yeah.
that goes back to, right, what I said at the beginning of the live stream before we started. No group is a monolith. So
Yeah,
everyone,
exactly.
you know, no matter what group you identify with or belong to, everyone's an individual person. So it's, all of our experiences are going to look different, which, you know, that was one reason. And I think that's why there's so much misconceptions about different mental health issues and different disorders and things. Because I remember when I first got my ADHD diagnosis, one of the things I was thinking was, you know, how has this gone unnoticed for so long? For, like, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 31, and so I was like, how have I never noticed and never
Yeah.
known? But then I also thought back to my younger brother, who also has ADHD and autism, and obviously he looks very different. He presents very different than I do
Mhm.
with my ADHD. And so I, you know, told my therapist before, I was like, I think that's why it never dawned on me that I had it as well, because it
Mhm.
looks completely different. Than his is more the the stereotype, what you think of when
Mhm.
you think of ADHD. Um, it's that uh, those assumptions, the stereotypical assumptions that people generally make, and so mine looking so different, I think that's why it was like, didn't really realize that. So
Yeah.
the more, I think, the more awareness that we have on all of these things, uh, I think the better it is. So
Yeah, I agree.
this is informative. I'm learning a lot, so I'm glad it's helping. Nia says, thank you for sharing that. My sister, who is amazing, is bipolar, and it isn't how people think. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so in the book, in Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, we see Cesar struggle with depression and suicidal ideations. Um, and I know in another interview you did recently, you've shared how writing is like a way for you to explore and work through your own trauma. And so I was just wondering, was Cesar's struggles part of you exploring that part of your mental health? And if so, what that was like for you?
Yeah, so I actually wrote Sesad into that book, like fully exploring my own stuff without realizing. I didn't know when I wrote that book, I didn't know I was bipolar. And you know, in my mind, Sesad is bipolar, right? It's not explored in that book. If I ever get to tell his story, which I would love to, it will be explored in that book. But yeah, I feel like I relate to him so much, and like the things, like his expression and how he kind of like plays everything off as like a joke to try to like keep it lighthearted and like so that people don't know like what's going on. I relate to that super hard. And he's just um he's going through it and he needs a hug, and I would love to explore his story more, honestly. I feel like he has a whole story that could be told.
Yeah, I do think so too. So I would be excited to read that story if you do.
See.
Uh, Especially with how things kind of ended for his character in this one. Um I'm glad we get like we have that glimmer of hope, that we see him, you know, talking more and like
Mhm.
trying to get help. And so I would love to see what that looks like more of his journey after that. So
Yeah.
um, Gabriel says a satire book would be amazing. Please tell his story. Yes, I agree.
I would
um,
love to. Hopefully publishing lets me do it.
well, if they won't, I will. So I would definitely read it. So I'll publish it if I have to. Um, Holly says yes, I'd read that. Let's see. So okay. So another thing I wanted to talk about was the neurodivergent piece. So neurodivergence is different for everyone, and looks different for everyone. Like I said, I'm completely different from my brother. So I was wanted to know, can you share what it means for you and how it affects your life?
Yeah, so I'm autistic and also ADHD. I think the autism is like a little bit more prevalent in my life than the ADHD, but yeah, I was late diagnosed, so I wasn't diagnosed with autism until I was 23, I believe. Um, and when I figured it out, I was like 22, 21. Um, and I figured out I was autistic and I was like so like excited to have words to describe it. To know that like, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just autistic. Like I'm not just weird. Like, like there's not like just something fundamentally missing. Like it's just a thing that a lot of people experience. So it was really nice to be able to discover that I was autistic and to be able to have like that um community and learn more about it in that way. Cuz I got my ADHD diagnosis when I was really young. So I always knew that, but like when I found out I was autistic, it was like life-changing. Um cuz I just never had an explanation for all of those things. Um yeah, so I think it affects like every aspect of my life. Like it affects how I view the world and how I eat food and how I, talk to people and interact and everything. So I like definitely view life through a very like autistic lens, if you will. Yeah.
So I guess kind of thinking about that, uh, what I know you said the autistic side is affects you a bit more than the ADHD side. Is there anything like in particular about the autism that affects you more? Like, are there sensory sensitivities that you have, or is there something else about the autistic side that affects you?
It's mostly like the sensory sensitivity, the um social stuff. I tend to take things really literally and not ever be able to tell if someone's like lying or joking. Like that's hard for me. Yeah, I think sensory sensitivity is a big one for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Where was I? Oh, here. So we've kind of touched on the different aspects of each of your marginalized identities. Can you share a bit about like how all of these different identities shape and impact your life, like the intersectionality of all of them?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a similar answer to like what I said before about how it's I don't know exactly like how it impacts me because I view the world through that lens. So I almost don't know what it would be like to not have this experience. Um so I know that I definitely have a very different experience from many other people, but it's just how I've always been and like how I've always like viewed the world. So it's kind of hard to say like how it shapes and impacts my life because it's just like my life, and maybe that's part of the autism being like, oh, this is all that there is, and like I can't like see past like my own little world. But yeah, so it is kind of hard to answer that question, but um I definitely feel it more when I'm outside of my bubble of friends, because I feel like my bubble of friends is pretty queer and pretty like open to all of these things. Like they're not going to be judging me because of my mental illness or anything like that. So when I step outside of that, it's usually like on the internet when I realize that people kind of suck.
Yeah.
And that people are really judgy about certain things and that you can't just like be open about who you are without getting backlash sometimes. So yeah, that kind of sucks.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Um, have you noticed any ways where like maybe one of your identities has an impact on the other one? So I guess I'm kind of thinking of like, um, for me, I know I've shared before that like with the ADHD, I my brain is like goes a million miles a second, and I want to do everything and anything and everything under the sun. So I'm always like wanting to go and do a lot of different things, but because of my physical disability, I do not have the energy or strength or capacity to
Mhm.
do as much, to keep up with as much as what my brain wants to do. So that can be kind of frustrating for me because I tend to push myself more than I should. But
Yeah.
just wondering, because you also said you have a physical disability as well.
Yeah.
So is there, do they impact?
Oh yeah. So something similar, like, so when I'm having a manic episode, I also have chronic fatigue. So I'll have a manic episode and just like go, not sleep for 3 days and just like do so many things. And then like because I have chronic fatigue, I have to catch up on that sleep sometime. So I will crash and sleep for like 19 hours at a time and just like fully like feel it for weeks afterwards. Like it's just like I cannot, like it takes so long to recover from a manic episode sometimes, depending on how long the episode lasts. Because my longest manic episode was when my book came out actually. Um I started my episode a couple days before my book came out, and then it lasted a month. So that took a really long time to recover from. It probably took longer than a month to recover from because of chronic fatigue and my physical disability, because I was just doing things that I physically shouldn't have been able to do. But I wasn't paying attention to my body and listening because I was manic. So yeah, there's that. And then there's also like things um like when people talk about disability, a lot of the time it feels like I feel like a lot of the discussion around disability excludes people of color. Um Whereas people would be like, oh, like they'll compare racism to disability as if disabled people of color don't exist. You know what I mean? Like as if these are two separate issues that do not impact each other at all. Like you can be experiencing both of these things and like yeah, I feel like I've seen that online a lot where people just kind of ignore people of color in disability spaces. I don't know if you've experienced that too, but it's just that can be pretty frustrating. Um uh and also like, you know, in like traditional Mexican culture or whatever, like it's very like Catholic and very like, you know, traditional. So like queerness is kind of like a struggle with that, at least for a while it was. Now my family is a lot more accepting than they were like when I was in high school, but um yeah, so that's something that like kind of clashed for me a little bit back then.
Yeah. Um, so I know that you have said that you kind of touched on this in another interview, that you would love to write a book that has a character that encompasses every aspect of all your marginalized identities. So the Mexican, Indigenous, queer, neurodivergent, disabled, mental illness, kind of all of that. But traditional publishing isn't ready for that yet. So you kind of have to put bits and pieces into different characters here and there.
Mhm.
What do you think it would mean for you to see yourself fully 100% represented in one character?
I think it would be really awesome to see. I think that people would be horrible about it. I think people would be like, "Oh my god, they're just trying to tick every diversity box. Oh my god, like they're just trying to like, you know, people would be like this is unrealistic." Like
Mhm.
when like I think no one would think it's realistic, but it is realistic and I would love to see it and I think it would mean a lot to me. And I would love to do it one day. I'm getting closer. Like in every book I write, I'm like sprinkling a little bit more in there. Like
Mhm.
so like my first book was like Yami was lesbian and she was, you know, brown, Mexican, Indigenous, right? My next book, Ari, the main character in the Luis Ortega Survival Club, is Mexican, she's bisexual, and she's autistic. Um, and then like in the next book that I write, it's gonna be like a little bit more. And so like I'm just gonna keep trying to sprinkle things in. And so we'll see when I eventually get to tell a story that like has everything in there.
Yeah, that would be really cool. So,
Yeah.
but I do agree. I see how I think because it's not something that's talked about, and again, a lot of this is still kind of taboo. So I think that's why, it would be hard for a lot of people to think that it is real and someone could have all these identities rather than just ticking off a box to have all
Mhm.
have all this stuff in one character.
Yeah.
But it is real, and you do have people who fall into all of these, all of the different marginalized identities. So,
Mhm.
um, Heather says, thank you for sharing all of this. And Holly says, wow, then it's even more impressive that you write books, promote them, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's see. My other question was, when it comes to your marginalized identities, what are some stereotypes or tropes that you think writers should be aware of and maybe stay away from?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I feel like we could do a whole interview on just this. But like for the most part, I would say stay away from, like you said, making anyone into a monolith like that represents the entire culture or the entire experience. So like if I think it's good to look at who your characters are that are marginalized and what they're doing in the story. So if you only have one villain and you only have one disabled person and the villain is the disabled person, maybe look at that and think about why you decided to do that. But if you have 5 disabled people and one of them is the villain, that's fine. As long as they're all nuanced different people and they're not like portraying like the same stereotype or something like that, you know? Same with like queer people or with like people of color or like, you know, anything like that. Like there are of course specific tropes for specific marginalized identities that you would want to stay away from, but there's so many of them that, like, first of all, that's why sensitivity readers are so important. Like always make sure you got a sensitivity reader, make sure you're like, you know, paying someone for their work to like actually go through and like use their own experience to inform whether something is offensive or not. But also I think just like variety is key, like making sure that, you know, and of course, like if you are a cis straight, you know, white Christian woman, you don't have to go and make every character, you know, like queer and brown and disabled and atheist or whatever. You don't have to go and like add diversity just to add diversity. But if you are putting diversity in your books, just make sure that you look at who those characters are and what that is saying. So specifically with villains, I feel like that's a big thing is people will make the brown character, the queer character, or the disabled character the villain, or the mentally ill character, which is also disability. But, you know, they'll make those characters into the villain, and then have no other of those characters in the rest of the book. So that's just something to think about. Like, who's your villain and who are your marginalized characters? And you can have a marginalized character be the villain, but it's a lot harder. You just got to make sure that they're really nuanced, and you have to make sure that like you're asking certain questions and making sure you get a sensitivity reader and all of that. So
yeah, totally. And let's see. Yeah, so true. Yeah. So then what I mean, you kind of also touched on this in this question here, but is there any other advice that you would give to writers that are writing intersectional characters? Anything we haven't touched on yet?
I would say just make sure that they're all three-dimensional characters, like give them personality and like quirks and everything that you would give to like another character, just like, you know, make sure they're three-dimensional and not like a stereotype, like a walking stereotype.
Yeah, for sure. And also, the one thing I was thinking about when you were sharing that as well is when it comes to like mental illness and like neurodivergence and you know, things like autism and ADHD or what, or you know, all these different things. one thing I have heard is like, writers might look at the DSM diagnostic statistic manual for the criteria of, what are the traits or symptoms someone has to have to be diagnosed with this. One thing I would caution authors about is if when you see the list of symptoms or traits, don't include every single one of them in your book, in your character, because just because someone's autistic doesn't mean they are going to have every single trait that's listed on there.
Yeah.
Same for any other disability or illness listed in the DSM. And Holly says, yes, please make that a TikTok reel clip because you will shout this out from the rooftops. Okay. Remind me which part you're referencing for that. And I'll see if I'll do that. So let's see. I have one last question left on my list, and then we'll get to the Q&A section really quickly. So if anyone has any questions for Sonora during the Q&A round, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box right now. I'll get to my last question, and then I'll see if anyone watching live has any questions they want to ask. So my last one is just, are there any books or resources you recommend that can help writers in their portrayal of these marginalized identities?
There is, the only resource that I can think of right now is Writing with Color on Tumblr. I think that's what it's called. Let me just check right now.
Yeah, that is. I
Oh, it is?
use them. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Writing with Color. I think they're great. They have a lot of good resources on there on like how to describe skin tones, how to describe eyes, how to describe like lips, and all these different things that can fall easily into like being offensive if you don't know how to describe certain things. So I would follow them. I would also say just read widely about people who share these marginalized identities that you want to write about. So like if you want to write about, like if you have a character who has an identity that you don't have, just make sure you're like, if you don't have anyone in your life that is like that, then read a bunch of books with those characters and like make sure you're like, and I would always recommend always read a bunch of books with marginalized characters. Like I think that that's always a good thing to do. So yeah, just like make sure that you're reading like widely in like all different kinds and in the genre that you're trying to write too. So like I know that it's really hard sometimes because some genres are super lacking with certain marginalizations. Like there's not a lot of disability in dystopian books, but like, if you are looking at a specific disability, like it doesn't have to be a dystopian book or whatever. It can be whatever, just to like get an idea of. And of course, sensitivity readers also, I'll just say again, because you don't want to, like, just know you're never an expert on something that you are not, is not your lived experience. So you're never going to be an expert. You're never going to be like the person to say what this experience is like. So don't try to like represent what that experience is like. Just try to represent them as like a person,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my opinion.
And then Holly said where she said how not to write diverse characters, and that if you're cis white Christian woman, don't throw out everything in your story just because. Okay. All right. So let's see. What Gabriella asks, what is your writing process like, and how does it change based on the type or genre of book you're writing, i.e., a lighthearted book versus an emotionally heavier book?
If I'm writing a lighthearted book, I can usually just get through it in one sitting. Like, I will write all day until I feel like I am done writing for the day. And usually like that's like I like to body double. Like it's really hard for me to write by myself. So I'll be on a Zoom call with some writer friends, or I'll be at a coffee shop or whatever. But I can, if it's lighthearted, I can usually just like type away and I'm having a great time and it's just fun. But if it's really heavy, I have to take a lot of breaks. So if I'm drafting, what I usually do is if I get to a really heavy scene and I don't want to stop drafting, I'll just put like a watermelon. All right, watermelon, write this emotional scene. And then I'll, at the end, I'll control find all watermelons and then go and do all of them when I'm in the right headspace to do them, so that I can make sure that I'm like actually drafting a whole book. Like if I want to draft quickly, because I tend to try to draft quickly, and then revise over a longer period of time. So for me, that's how I manage to draft quickly, even if it's a book that is really difficult, like a really heavy book. I just drafted a really heavy book and I had to take a lot of breaks. And I had to be with people while I was doing it. So
Let's see. Heather says, well said. And Gabriella asks, do you have any advice for overcoming writer's block?
yes. So I think writer's block is usually caused by something else. Like I don't think it's just this mysterious phenomena. I think that it is caused by like check your body, right? Like so if you're having writer's block, think about, okay, have you had water? Have you gone to the bathroom? Have you eaten? Have you slept enough? All of those things, if any of those need help, that's why you have writer's block. If not, then so those are your physical needs, right? Then look at your like emotional needs. Like, are you going through something right now? Like, do you need a break? Have you been overworking yourself? Like, have you like, like what do you need emotionally? Like, and then if all of that is good, then go to your story. And it's like, okay, is something not working in the story? Do you have to go backwards a little bit to figure out where something is not clicking? Or like, do you need to talk it through with someone? Do you need to brainstorm what happens next? Like a lot of the time I need to brainstorm what happens next before I can like actually write it down. So those are the those 3 steps, right? 4 steps. I don't know how many steps. Those are the steps I take when I have writer's block of like, okay, so I take care of my physical needs, emotional needs, and then my book needs. And usually that will solve writer's block for me if I do all 3 of those things.
Yeah. That's really good. I was going to say, if anyone is familiar with the Writing Mastery Academy, I was in that academy like a couple weeks or months ago. I was going through one of their courses on there, and it's on writer's block and how to overcome writer's block. So if anyone is still stuck and wants more, and if you want to and can do it, sign up for the Writing Mastery Academy. They have a whole bunch of different courses in there. And that's also where I learned about the fast drafting that you mentioned. And I think for me, I think if I feel like I have writer's block, if it's during the drafting phase, it's because I'm overthinking and trying to get things perfect. And I need to be like, this is the crap draft. Just write crap and fix it later.
Yeah.
So I gotta remind myself of that.
Yeah.
If I'm in
100%.
the drafting phase. And Holly said what they said. Sorry about that. And thank you, Holly, for apologizing and pointing that out, because I just read your comment and forgot to change it as well when I read it. So
Thank you.
Gabriella says, can you talk more about QPOC and what inspired you to start the space? Is it still going on? How can people get involved?
Yeah, so I before Twitter kind of imploded, I was running a monthly chat called QPOC Chat on Twitter for queer and trans author, like BIPOC authors. So we would talk about our stories, we would talk about publishing, we would talk about writing for an hour every month. And I want to get started on that again. I'm kind of waiting it out to see if Twitter goes under. But I don't really know. Maybe I'll do it again this month. But also I'm trying to, me, Emery Lee, and Johnny Garzavia, other YA authors, are working on putting together a QPOC Fest, which we are tentatively hoping to put together in July. It's going to be a virtual book fest where we're going to highlight all, QT BIPOC books. So queer and trans books by authors of color. And anyone can come support. You don't have to be QTBIPOC to support and enjoy the festival, but it's going to be highlighting those specific books and those specific authors. So that's the goal with that. And hopefully there will be much more to come in the future, but that's what we've got in the pipelines right now.
Cool. Sounds great. Holly says great writer's block advice. The book fest sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Look forward to hear more about the fest. Yeah.
Yay.
So cool. Woohoo. Hip Hop Fest. Yep. All right. So we're just gonna start wrapping up. If anyone has any last minute questions that they really want to ask, drop them in the chat box now, and we'll try to get to any quickly last minute questions as we wrap up. Heather says, I just subscribed to your newsletter to stay up to date.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sonora, for being here today and chatting with me about all the different aspects of your identities and what makes you you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here and sharing your experience. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Sorry, I was just reading the comment. Yeah, no, I think that covers it. If you want to find me, I'm sonorareyes.com. Sonora Reyes on Twitter, sonora.reyes on Instagram and TikTok, I believe.
Yeah. So all of Sonora's links are in the description box below. So go follow her and check her out on all the different platforms. And thank you guys for everyone who was joining us here live. Thank you for being here and for chatting with us. And for those watching the replay, I hope this was really valuable and you got a lot out of it. I'm glad some people said they were learning a lot. I learned a lot during this time too. So that's one of the reasons why I love doing this. I learn so much out of these interviews as well. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have, I think, for today. So, again, thank you everyone for being here, and I will see you guys next month for another live stream interview. So,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.